I didn't actually have a title for this paper at all before about 10 minutes ago. I've tentatively called it Pedagogy and Globalising AG. It relates to some research that I've started doing recently about the globalisation of creativity through higher education institutions. I'll talk a little bit about, what I want to do is talk a little bit about pedagogy practice, and then I want to talk a little bit about an outsourcing project. So it's not technically an outsourcing project, a collaborative link with a university that I've been involved with in Egypt. And I'll try and draw some connections between the two and bring it back to the discussion we've been having today. Can everybody hear me all right?
A little bit louder.
A little bit louder. Okay.
A bit closer to the mic.
Okay. So is this any better?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the language of the contemporary university is the language of governance, of accountability, of total quality management, of excellence. Teaching and learning, I was told a few days ago, pedagogy is a matter of delivery, as if higher education was a pizza or a meal in a nice restaurant. What I want to talk about first here is the underlying conception of pedagogy that has allowed this conception of education as delivery to come about. I think we need to try to challenge the pedagogical assumptions that underline this idea of education as delivery. Assumptions that simultaneously comfort and are comforted by the discriminatory selective processes that have been made evident by the operation of the PBIS, the machinery which selects out those who aren't rich, who come from trouble spots around the world, who can't jump through all the hoops and so on and so forth. I think the current conflicts over humanities in HE are particularly symptomatic in this regard, and it's my involvement in trying to develop media courses in Egypt that sort of led to these ideas in the first place. Okay. In the first place, I think it's important to point out that institutions, as well as individuals, have a considerable investment, both financial and emotional, in excellence, in expertise, and in the authority accruing to knowledge that arises within universities. My institution itself prides on calling its academic staff experts. It's expertise that they very rarely avail themselves of, but it's a rhetoric that they use nonetheless. And many of us, I'm sure, will know professors and other academics who enjoy the trappings of status, power, and an unquestioned right to assume the preeminence of their opinions that accrue to being globe-trotting academics. The authority and expertise that universities rely on, often, as some of us will know, bought at the cost of getting the bulk of teaching work to be done by PhDs at bargain prices, can be difficult to challenge. Not least of all because many students are themselves attracted to particular institutions because of the academic star system those institutions have in place, and it's a star system. In the humanities in particular, it's a star system that is supported or reinforced by the publishing industry, which is often on the lookout for the latest academic who will sell large copies of books. The point I'm trying to make here is that the asymmetric relationship that is implied in the idea of education as delivery is related to and supported by processes of learning within the institution that rely on authority and expertise. So I think there's a fundamental asymmetry in the pedagogic relationship that sets up a hierarchy between staff and student, and I think is problematic. At the same time, and this is something that crops up when you read about the concerns that have been expressed about the points-based immigration system and the effect that it's having on students. At the same time, we find bandied around universities phrases like, quotes, "the university is nothing without its students," or "a range of students from a range of backgrounds helps an institution thrive," or "students contribute to the vitality of an institution." Now, I don't want to criticise these kinds of statements. They're very widely made, and I make them myself. I think they are symptomatic, and they indicate that there is another side to the story, which the asymmetric conception of education as the delivery of knowledge or imparting of professorial wisdom knows very little about. These kinds of statements, which are often appropriated by self-promoting managerial or marketing discourses, rarely, if ever, cross a threshold whereby they can become critical to the ongoing understanding of learning itself, or indeed considered intrinsic to the institution. Academics, of course, like the idea of having responsive students, but we often balk at the idea that students might change anything essential about the knowledge we transmit, or the problems to which our knowledge responds that it presupposes. We like good students, lively students, receptive students, as these make our job easier. They provide a patient, pleasant environment within which to work. But the difficulty is that saying that students contribute to the vitality of an institution will, within that institution, only get heard as opinion or belief, and not as something essential to the institution as an entity. Only put the kind of abstract language within which the university understands itself to one side and considers everyday educational practices, I would suggest that there's a rather different set of circumstances. In different disciplinary fields, there are ways of posing problems, raising questions, distinguishing between what is pertinent, what is not pertinent, a question to ask, a whole problematic field that is staked out on the university, on the student body, demarcated, given the safe borders of a territory. We like to distinguish between what's pertinent within the classroom and what is irrelevant, what students' personal problems are often referred to as. And these kinds of practices and these kind of demarcations, can be accomplished by anything from organisation and arrangements, what's an appropriate topic for a tutorial or a time for a tutorial, even explicit feedback, the way in which seminars or lectures are punctuated by silence, moments of difficulty, through to body language and gesture. So there's a pedagogical practice here, I'm suggesting, which is utterly dependent upon the relationship with students, but this relationship is factored out in the discourse that the institution holds about itself. So the fact that none of this has ever really seemed important, except that it might result in a poor score for end-of-term feedback forms, is not particularly surprising. It wouldn't be the first time that the metrics used to develop an understanding of academic practice missed the point entirely. The managerialism that prevails in educational institutions is epistemologically poorly equipped either to acknowledge or to understand the micro-political dynamics of the institution and hence the role of the student. But it's important to point out here that that managerialism doesn't stand up by itself. It finds support in different disciplinary fields in different ways. The postgraduate philosophy seminar, for example, is a very different beast to the first-year introduction to computing science. But its support, or at least its quiescence, can be extracted through the hierarchy of value that research excellence calls for. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that the educational situation seems to contain something a bit unrulier and a bit more difficult to manage, both practically and representationally, than is suggested by the one-way relationship of the delivery system or the measured achievement of well-defined outcomes. And it's something that I think has to be made central to our understanding and not a mere contingency to be rationalised or optimised away. In fact, I'd suggest that the presence of students who resist or challenge the tacit assumptions of the educational process, who are sometimes perceived not to speak in the dominant codes of education, is crucial. In fact, I'd say that the recalcitrance or the resistance of the student body is essential. Diversity is not just a prerequisite for creative pedagogy, it's crucial to the development and generation of robust knowledge. I hope put this in slightly different terms. There's a kind of cynicism that often goes on around in universities. Backroom discussions amongst academics often revolve around how stupid or idiotic we feel students to be. But I think there's a case for reconsidering this idiocy, because the term idiocy, after all, is closely related to the notion of idiom. There's a translation problem that goes on in the classroom, which I think has never been seriously addressed. The fact that we speak different idioms with different priorities and have different concerns is absolutely crucial. And negotiating an exchange between idioms is what a pedagogy based on the co-expertise of learning rather than a hierarchy of education requires.